Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Discovery, Inc. for doing the work that you do to change or investigate or overturn wrongful convictions. I'm excited that we're finally in this period in our country where we are examining policies, many of which were put in place about 30 years ago at the beginning of the crack cocaine epidemic. We didn't understand addiction and we were angry in society. So what we did was we passed a series of laws that have had a devastating consequences in our country, especially to the African-American population. Those laws led to very long sentences. Some of them were outrageous. And once we started passing laws related to drugs, we got angry about crime and we passed laws that impacted people while they were in prison, prohibited them from working after prison, prohibited them from living certain places, from associating with people. And we didn't understand that when you incarcerate someone, you're incarcerating an entire family. And it impacts neighborhoods because people who were arrested tended to be concentrated in poor inner city communities, many family members arrested, incarcerated, women arrested, incarcerated, children's removed. It's had a destabilizing impact in entire neighborhoods and communities. And finally, we're taking a look at the criminal justice system. And I'm very happy about that and so happy about the role that Discovery Inc. has played. Thank you very much. And I will now turn it over to Christina.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for having us, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We have an exciting and packed session in store for you that's hosted by Discovery, the parent company of some of our favorite networks, like Discovery Channel, Food Network, HGTV, OWN, Oprah Winfrey Network, TLC, and so many more. Today's session is going to be broken into 3 separate conversations, and I am honored to be here to moderate the first conversation around how the criminal legal system disproportionately impacts Black people and other people of color. This is a topic that I am incredibly passionate about. I've dedicated my entire professional career to criminal legal system reform. My name is Christina Swarns, and I am the Executive Director of the Innocence Project. I am thrilled to welcome Allison Pierre, who is the founder and CEO of Innovative Prosecution Consulting, who works in partnership with American University's School of Public Affairs to the virtual stage. I'm also thrilled to welcome Jessalyn McCurdy, Interim Executive Vice President for Government Affairs and Managing Director at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Welcome, and thank you to you both for being here. So let's start with some numbers. We all know that Black people comprise 13% of the United States population. But according to the National Registry of Exonerations, almost half of the 2,725 exonerations that took place in this country since 1989 were of Black people. Innocent Black people are 7 times more likely than innocent white people to be convicted of murder, 3.5 times more likely to be convicted of sex crimes, and 12 times more likely to be convicted of drug crimes. Innocent Black people spend an average of 13.8 years wrongly in prison before they're exonerated. And that is about 45% longer than innocent white people. Jessalyn, these numbers are staggering. Why? Explain this vast racial disparity. What's causing this?
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate your question and I appreciate this panel today to discuss a very important issue about the racial disparities in the criminal legal system. What we know is, for example, in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, 68% of the people incarcerated in the Federal Bureau of Prisons are Black or brown people in this country. And so what this country has become is what I like to call an incarceration nation. And the death penalty and people who are convicted of death and sent to death row are the end of the system. But it's really a continuum from police stops that constitute 60% of the police stops in this country are Black people, to arrest. Black people are 4 times more likely than white people to be arrested for a crime, to convictions, and then sentencing of lengthy sentences. And so we have a system that at every point in the where the decisions are made, Black and brown people are overrepresented. But we have to really, if we want to solve this problem, talking about every point in the continuum and try to make changes at every point in the continuum.
You know, over the last year, we have all seen the world begin, finally, to wake up to some of these injustices. Have you seen any data to show that things have been getting better? Are there trends that indicate we're going finally in the right direction?
What we saw in 2020 was an awakening to the problems with the criminal legal system after George Floyd's murder. We were in the middle of a pandemic and people were at home. They saw the tape on the news and they were standing still and they saw live and in person the problems with the system. And so I'm not sure if the data is showing that there's improvement, but there is an awakening to the need for a new system. And I think that's what's most important in this conversation, is that this is a system that has existed since slavery and is based in a notion that Black people as slaves should be caught and captured. And that's where we see, for example, policing in this country has risen out of those concepts. And when you have a system that is based in that, there is no way you can reform that type of system. You really have to think about creating a system that is fair and just for all, not just white people, but for Black and brown people as well.
Yeah, amen, 100%. We are absolutely in need of full structural reform. I will say the one data point I look to from the last year that I think is, of course, the prosecution and conviction, right, of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. And we know that in years past, that wouldn't have been, neither one of those would have been guaranteed, which brings me to you, Allison. Prosecutors wield enormous power over the criminal legal system. Talk to us about how they can prevent people of color and Black people from being wrongfully convicted in this country.
It's wonderful to be with you both here today. Prosecutors are the most powerful actor in the criminal justice system, and most people don't understand that. And the reason is because prosecutors decide who comes into the courthouse, because they're the person who decides about charging, the nature of the charges, and it's only the prosecutor who can dismiss a case. As the most powerful actor in the criminal justice system, they have the best way to really make piercing transformational change. There needs to be a commitment, I think, not only just from the elected prosecutor, but everyone in the office, to look at racial disparities and how cases are handled. In terms of wrongful convictions, there's a growing trend now where several prosecutors' offices around the country have something called conviction integrity units. And this is something that's been recommended by Fair and Just Prosecution, as well as the University of Pennsylvania Law School, the Quadrone Center. My hope is that of the 2,400 prosecutor offices in our country, there will be a growing trend to do much more community engagement with African-American community, and 2, to have these conviction integrity units as part of the natural course of business in any prosecutor's office.
I agree 100%. The Innocence Project is absolutely in favor of seeing far more prosecutors' offices bringing on conviction integrity units. Jesselyn, what reforms do we need to see throughout the criminal legal system, from policing to the judicial system to prisons.
Particularly in the case of the death penalty, one reform we must see is we must make sure that people are adequately or zealously represented from the beginning and have representation to defend any accusations that are lodged against them. And that's important. Public defenders are not funded at the level that prosecutors are. And we have to have equal funding for public defenders as well as prosecutors. They have to be on the same level to be able to provide the same level of representation. I think that's one data point that needs to happen in the system. Another is, again, we really have to look at this system, and I think we've spent a lot of money and time and effort trying to reform the criminal legal system. It is now at a point that we have to reimagine the criminal legal system. And I know that is a hard pill to swallow and not something that we in this country are used to, blowing up a system and reforming it and reimagining it. But as Black and Brown people in this country, we are not getting the same results that white people are in this country with this system. Everybody wants safety, but we can keep each other safe without this system and without so much of an emphasis on policing and more of an emphasis on public safety.
I think all of us here agree that real meaningful transformation is necessary in order to get us to the place where we're no longer having a conversation about this racial disproportionality in the criminal legal system. And again, there is absolutely no way we're going to get to that place without the prosecutors joining in the reform effort. So Allison, talk to us about how progressive prosecutors can make transformational change across the country.
In 2017, and really even a couple years before, there's been an emergence of progressive district attorneys being elected to office. Now more than ever before, there are more women elected to that position and more Black women. It is incredible. Never before have we seen the emergence of women of color in these top positions. That connects to the African American community in this way. There's been historic disparities in how prosecutors have dealt with different communities in terms of charging, for instance, in particular drug offenses. There's a lot of evidence about disparities about decision-making with drug offenses. And that's something that prosecutors can look to make really significant policy reforms. My hope for the future is specifically twofold. One, to see prosecutors use data and technology to make their decisions more fair. And two, I want to see impact now. I am absolutely convinced that we have a window where we have the awakening and our country wants to see the reckoning. And the reckoning has to be in part led by prosecutors.
Thank you so much to both of you, Allison and Jesselyn, for this compelling and timely conversation. Now, I am incredibly proud to introduce Representative Hakeem Jeffries. Congressman Jeffries represents the diverse 8th Congressional District of New York, an area that encompasses large parts of Brooklyn and a section of Queens. So we are excited to have him with us today. Representative Jeffries.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for these incredibly important panel discussions. America, of course, is a great country. We've come a long way. We still have a long way to go. But systemic racism has been in the soil of this country for over 400 years. And it continues to manifest itself in many ways, including by poisoning aspects of the criminal justice system. And that explains some of the racial disparities that we continue to witness to this very day. All of it occurring in the midst of a mass incarceration epidemic. 50 years ago, in 1971, then President Richard Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number one when he launched the failed war on drugs. At the time, there were less than 300,000 people incarcerated in America. Today, there are 2.3 million. Disproportionately, Black and Latino, many of those individuals who have been incarcerated throughout the years for nonviolent drug offenses. The rise of the mass incarceration epidemic, which now means that America incarcerates more people than any other country in the world, has led to a lock 'em up and throw away the key mentality that far too often has resulted in the abandonment of the presumption of innocence and the adoption of a perspective that one is presumptively guilty unless they can somehow manage to prove their actual innocence, often against great odds, with the deck being stacked against low-income Black defendants who often find themselves as the victims of overzealous law enforcement or overzealous prosecutors, sometimes in courtrooms with insensitive judges at best. That is why this discussion of dealing with wrongful convictions is so critical. Because if we truly are to be a country anchored in the principle of liberty and justice for all, then we cannot tolerate a single person of any race. And we know that those innocent individuals who are often incarcerated are disproportionately Black. But we should not be willing to tolerate the incarceration and wrongful conviction of a single individual in the United States of America. And I can say confidently that the House Judiciary Committee, the Congressional Black Caucus, and Democrats throughout the Capitol are committed to making sure we deal with the wrongful conviction phenomenon decisively as we continue our country's long, necessary, and majestic march toward a more perfect union. And I'm thankful for Taylor and the work that you have done in this area, and I proudly yield back the balance of my time to you.
Thank you, Representative Jeffries. I'm Taylor Riddick, a recent graduate of Georgetown University. In 2019, I was a part of the Making an Exoneree class at Georgetown University. Over 100 undergraduate students applied for 15 spots in Georgetown University's Making an Exoneree class that takes place every spring. We are divided into small groups and forego books and tests to become investigative journalists, documentarians, and social justice advocates with the goal of creating a documentary, website, and social media campaign that portrays the main issues, challenges, injustices, and stories of the wrongfully convicted cases we are reinvestigating. My group took on the case of Eric Riddick, and I'm thrilled to say that Eric is here with us virtually today as a free man, and I'm honored to have played a role in helping to make that happen. For this conversation, we will turn our focus to wrongful convictions, how they happen, and how we can combat them. Joining us today are Mark Howard and Marty Tankleff, co-founders of the Making an Exoneree program, Eric Riddick, a man who spent nearly 3 decades in prison for a crime he did not commit, Andrea Lewis, clinical assistant professor of law at Northwestern Center on Wrongful Convictions, and Riley Ross III, partner at Mincy Fitzpatrick Ross, LLC, who works with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, a member of the Innocence Network, which aims to identify and litigate cases of the convicted innocent. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. The rate of wrongful convictions in the United States is estimated to be somewhere between 2% to 10%. This may seem like a rather low number, but when you compare it to our prison population of 1.8 million, you are looking at 36,000 to 180,000 individuals who have been wrongfully convicted, a staggering number. And we all know Black people disproportionately represent these wrongful convictions. Andrea, let's start with you. We discussed during the last panel racial disparities in the criminal justice system. We know these racial disparities and systemic racism contribute to wrongful convictions, but can you shed light on any other contributors to wrongful convictions? What are the challenges to overturning them?
There are actually several factors that we commonly see contributing to wrongful convictions. One of the more common ones, and the one that was most common or a top contributor in 2020 exonerations, is official misconduct. And when I say official misconduct, I mean, some sort of misconduct by the police or by prosecutors along the way in a defendant's case. That one's particularly important because it heavily impacts Black defendants. And we know that Black people already make up well over half of exonerees to date. Some other factors that contribute to wrongful convictions have been mistaken eyewitness identifications. So some witness who saw the crime just identified the wrong person as the perpetrator. We see false confessions quite a bit. Someone confesses to the crime and did not commit that crime, and we see that happen. As far as challenges, there are probably too many to name, but I'll give you a few fairly common ones that'll be relevant to the people watching this presentation today. And one big one is just procedural barriers in the law. A lot of criminal cases are state-based, and each state makes its own criminal law. And every state can determine, for instance, when someone who has been wrongfully convicted can present new evidence to the court, and whether a person who has claims that they're innocent can come back to court. A lot of times in a lot of laws, you need to have new evidence of your innocence that you didn't have previously, which understandably is difficult for people who are in prison and they can't be out in the world searching for evidence that they were innocent. And so then convincing people in power, particularly judges, and often the public, that someone did not commit a crime for which they were convicted can be very difficult and requires sort of changing the mindset of people who've already determined someone is guilty. And then finally, resources, having resources, and in particular representation for a person who's in prison to be able to overturn a wrongful conviction is really important.
Thank you for that response. Riley, you are a partner at a preeminent law firm. What made you get involved with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project and wrongful conviction cases? How are organizations like the Pennsylvania Innocence Project aiming to be part of the solution?
Thank you for that question. And I'm definitely happy to be here to speak about it. I got involved with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project and at the outset when the project was being created. I think like most people, especially people practicing law, I was I still am a criminal defense attorney, former federal public defender, and definitely interested in justice and the idea of someone being wrongly convicted, someone being innocent and in prison is something that, just really goes against everything we think about when we talk about justice. And as far as the organization itself, it's really dedicated to freeing the innocent, but not only that, but trying to prevent wrongful conviction from happening in the first place.
Thank you for sharing. Eric, it's so great to see you again. As someone who was wrongfully convicted, can you share what that experience is like for you? How did you hold on to hope? What did it mean for Mark and Marty and our team of Georgetown students to get involved in your case?
Well, thank you for having me first and foremost. It was devastating. It was not devastating just for me, but also my family and those who loved me. It was an experience that no person should have to go through. But the blessing in it is that, it showed me and it showed pretty much the world, because this case have gained so much attention. It allowed the world to see versatility of support, not just at the grassroots, but, in many different fields coming together on not just my case, but specifically talking about my case. Seeing different people coming together, joining a fight that's worth fighting for, justice. But I want to thank Georgetown. Georgetown came onto this fight and fought and gave everything. It's just a beautiful moment just to be a part of this moment. Sitting on this panel is just mind-blowing to me. That I'm sitting here now. Only two and a half months ago, I was just sitting in prison, condemned literally to die in prison. because in Pennsylvania, life is death by incarceration. But I would like to briefly comment on something that I heard earlier from Andrea Lewis when she was actually answering a question about origin or the foundation of wrongful convictions. Effective representation is very important. You know, this is one of the things that I realized in my fight. A lot of guys had to learn the law because we couldn't get effective representation. Partially some because a lot of attorneys was overwhelmed with cases. One of the things that I realized when I was fighting for my freedom, you know, that is the most, for me, that's the most important right, effective representation. You know, and not just for the defendant, because the prosecutor is also an attorney. You know, and I think that as we reform in the system, and to reform the system, we have to re-educate those that function in that profession, you know. So I hope that answered your question.
Definitely answered the question. I'm so happy that you're here with us today, Eric. Mark, what drove you to get involved in Eric's case? Why is it so important to do the work that you and Marty are doing through the Making and Exonerate program?
Thanks, Taylor, and great to see you all again. You know, there's an amazing backstory behind how we came to hear about Eric's case and to get involved. So Marty and I first taught this Making and Exonerate class in the spring 2018 semester. It ended in May, and that September, we were able to help secure an exoneration of Valentino Dixon, who had served 27 years before being exonerated. 2 months later, I happened to be hosting an event at Georgetown, a huge event with none other than Meek Mill, who himself had just been released from prison through this horrible ordeal he'd been through on probation, where he'd been sent in and out and in and out, tremendous injustice that he'd suffered personally. And he became dedicated to this cause, to helping others. Meek turns to me and he says, wow, you helped the dude get out who served 27 years. He says, I have a friend who's innocent in prison who's been in for 27 years. And I said, well, get me his info. Let's see if we can get involved and help. And then I followed up, obviously, looked into Eric's case, thought it was just an outrageous situation that he ever could have been convicted in the first place. I mean, all of the physical evidence points in a different direction. There's no way Eric could physically have even plausibly committed the murder. And yet he'd been convicted, and 27 years later, he was still in. So we put together an amazing group of students. And so you're meeting one of them, Taylor, along with Kendall Long and Alex Buffone. And they just did a tremendous job. They invested every single ounce of energy, all of their heart and soul into it. They went so far beyond taking this as if it were a class exercise. It became their life mission. And they connected with Eric's lawyer, Emeka Igwe. They worked with his legal team and they made the presentation in front of the Conviction Integrity Unit in Philadelphia. They prepared that presentation. They did just a phenomenal job. And we all became part of Team Riddick. And, you know, when I look at Eric here today, I think just how is it even possible that he just 2.5 months ago was still serving a life sentence? And how much worse off would we be as a society with him still in prison? When you look at him today and think about what he has to offer, he's hit the ground running. He's started a foundation, the Emergency Response Foundation. He's an extraordinary force for good, and he's going to do so much good for his community, for Philadelphia, and for the country overall. And I think you just got a little taste of that now. And so what I, just to close, want to say is that in addition to Eric, there are so many people who are left behind. Marty and I get hundreds of requests now for people to consider their cases. But really that is the core, the backbone of our program, which is that we know what this injustice is like, and we want to do everything we can to overcome it and to bring people home who are wrongfully convicted, who don't belong there. And Eric is a prime example of that, and we'll always be proud of the role that we played in his case, and always be thrilled and happy every time we see Eric, because he's the embodiment of what we believe in.
Thank you so much, Mark. Marty, you are also an exoneree, having spent 17 years in prison for a crime that you didn't commit. What can policymakers do to help prevent the injustice of wrongful convictions from happening? What change needs to happen?
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you for everybody having me today. It's just amazing to be here with Eric and Mark and Taylor and Riley and Andrea, and just be able to talk about this issue because it's part of my life. It's my life journey. After being in prison for almost 18 years, shortly after I was released, I had the first opportunity in 2018 to testify before a Senate committee in Harlem on wrongful convictions. And I've been advocating since 2018 for a number of policy changes. For me, one of the biggest policy changes I think we should have a kind of a uniform rule across America is that every single interview and interrogation should be electronically recorded. And I say this because I worked on cases where witnesses were interviewed multiple times. And as their witness interviews progressed, what they said changed dramatically from exculpatory to inculpatory. If you're not conducting an interview in an illegal form or fashion, you shouldn't be afraid of it. We've learned over the last decade, 15, 20, 30 years, that video has been able to save lives. We have the opportunity when individuals have given confessions to go back and actually watch those confessions, determine were they coerced, were facts suggested to the individual. The same goes for interviews. We also need to change evidence preservation across America, the way we conduct lineups. I think they're suggestive, and I also think lineups and show-ups, those should be recorded as well. Thankfully, we're seeing a dramatic change in conviction integrity units across America. They should not be solely focused on innocence, because if somebody was not constitutionally convicted, it's a wrongful conviction. If they were deprived of effective representation, it's a wrongful conviction. If evidence was used against them that we've now learned is not scientifically valid, it's a wrongful conviction. I also think that there needs to be more resources. If you look at the amount of attorneys or innocence projects that are doing this work now, and if you see how many exonerations we're obtaining every year, if we double the amount of money that we could give to the resources and these groups, imagine how many more innocent people we could be freeing every single year.
Thank you, Marty. For everyone, what is one suggestion you would share with our viewers on how we can all work together to prevent wrongful convictions or help innocent individuals trapped in the system?
I am happy to start. In a country where in a lot of jurisdictions we elect our prosecutors, I think we can be asking serious questions before we vote for them about their perceived roles in the criminal legal system. We can also, speaking about conviction integrity units, we can ask how they think about and or plan to handle people's claims that they were wrongfully convicted. And so there are definitely things that people in the general public can be doing to help effectuate change in the area of wrongful conviction.
To add to that, like in Philadelphia, regarding my case, there have always been evidence that proves my innocence. The PCRA statute in Philadelphia, it set unconstitutional time barriers or time limitations where an individual convicted, say for example, if they come across exculpatory evidence in the future, that evidence that can prove innocent is time barred by statutes. And at the same time, a lot of times that evidence is found later on, not because of lack of diligence on the case of the defendant, but because of ineffective assistance of counsel. So a lot of times, like in my case and so many other cases, we had to learn the law because we could not get effective representation. So once we start studying law, it took us years to really understand it to the degree where we can file a brief. Now we find an evidence, now we present it, and they hold us accountable for not presenting that evidence prior or sooner. So, that would be one of the recommendations that I would recommend.
I can jump in here next. I think that one thing that we can do to prevent wrongful conviction is recognizing that this is not an anomaly. This is not something that just happens in a crazy, unique situation. This is systematic. There are systematic problems with our justice system that make it easy for those who are innocent to be convicted, and it makes it very easy for them to remain in jail, including the statutes like Mr. Riddick just spoke of. And that's something that we have to do something about. The other part of your question was, what do we do for those that are trapped in this? And I think that in the exonerations that I've seen come through the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, one common denominator has been at least one person that person has had in their corner throughout. how can people, spend this much time in prison and not be angry and not drive themselves crazy with knowing that they're innocent. And I think a lot of that is because they have that lifeline on the outside, someone who believes in them and that's helping to fight for them. And so I think that that's one thing that we can do is to continue to fight, even though we know a lot of these hurdles that are in place, continue to show love for that individual, continue to be in that person's corner, continue to be a lifeline for that person to help provide the energy that they need to continue fighting until we can correct the system that makes it so easy to keep them in prison.
Yeah, I just want to echo what everyone said, but I think what we really need to do is eliminate some of these time bars or statute of limitations that exist throughout the country. And one of the biggest ones is the AEDPA, which limits individuals who are incarcerated to file a federal habeas corpus to 1 year. Prior to the enactment of the AEDPA, the federal habeas corpus was really that safeguard. We need to revert back to pre-AEDPA, get rid of the 1 year statute of limitations completely. And I think, like Eric was saying, the 1 year, I think on the PCRA, individuals incarcerated have a very challenging time conducting investigations, uncovering evidence. Even people who have investigators out there, it can take years because sometimes the discovery of evidence isn't so simple. Because you may have prosecutorial misconduct or government obstruction. You may have witnesses who are afraid to come forward for whatever reason. So these time bars really need to get eliminated. One of the things that I think we need to do is bring together judges who have actually freed exonerees, and prosecutors. Because I think what we need to do is empower judges and let them understand that they shouldn't be afraid to grant release. Because I think the success rate of exonerees is like 99%, that they don't reoffend, that they go on and live their lives. One of the big issues for exonerees, though, is when you come home, there's nothing for you. There really is no organization, there's no group, and we're not talking about thousands of people. On average, you're talking about 100 to 200 exonerees every year. And I think we do have the ability to work with exonerees upon release and organizations to create that transition to reintegration of society much easier.
In the 3 exonerations and prison releases that Marty and I in our program, Making Exoneree, have been involved with so far, and I say so far because there are many more to come, but in all 3, it was a newly elected prosecutor who was willing to essentially overturn the often decades of what the predecessor had done, which was really just to bury people and to bury the truth. So that role is absolutely critical. And we need to rethink the culture of prosecutors. We need to try to incentivize them to do the right thing, to be willing to overturn mistakes that were made in the past, to recognize them, to praise them. But I want to add one other dimension that I think is really important, which is about the appeals process. Because to the general public, there's this assumption that, the truth will come out in appeals. Well, the reality is appeals are a joke. Right? There's a very careful scientific study done by Brandon Garrett from Duke Law School, who took 100 cases of proven DNA wrongful convictions and compared them to 100 cases where presumably the person was guilty. These were match comparisons, same attributes, same type of crime, same sentence, et cetera. And what he showed was that being innocent does not make you more likely to succeed in the appeals process. And that's deeply troubling if the appeals are supposed to mean something and give someone a chance. And so what I think we need to do is completely recast how appeals work, because currently you don't appeal anything that is considered fact from a trial, but that's where all of the mistakes come in. That's where prosecutors are able to force something in, where there's flawed testimony, where there's evidence that's later shown to be unscientific, but that becomes sort of quote unquote fact. And the appeals process is only for issues of interpretation of the law. And there are fewer mistakes like that, so most just simply get rubber stamped. And so I think we need to have a genuine appellate process for issues of fact, and that when something is shown to be unscientific, untenable, flawed, when witnesses recant, there needs to be a much more direct process through appeals to overturn wrongful convictions.
Thank you to all of the panelists for this insightful conversation. I'd now like to introduce Representative Dwight Evans. Congressman Evans represents Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District and has had a long career in public service. and we're excited to welcome him to give remarks today.
Good evening. I'm Congressman Dwight Evans from Pennsylvania's 3rd Congressional District, North Central Philadelphia, West Philadelphia, and the home of Independence Hall. I say independence because where the Constitution was established, and the fact of the matter is to protect all people's rights. And that's important to understand, that all people's rights must be protected. I say to you that there's been a lot of injustices and wrongful convictions. And I joined this effort because of the district I represent and the proud that I say about the importance of involvement. I think that having this discussion, and I'm happy to join my colleague, Hakeem Jeffries from New York, is to talk about this discussion because it's long overdue that we address this inequity. And especially what has happened, particularly to the African-American community and particularly to African-American males. And through this panel, we look forward to this discussion. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Evans. Now I want to turn to our third and final conversation of this session, where we will discuss how a media company like Discovery is getting involved in the issues we've been discussing and making a direct impact. Hello, I'm Shireen Russell, SVP of Ad Sales and Inclusion Content Monetization Strategy at OWN, the Oprah Winfrey Network. And I'm excited to be with you all virtually today to help lead this conversation. Discovery is a global leader in real life, entertainment. Discovery's DE&I and social good teams have created a program for its employees in partnership with the founders of Making and Exonerate. The goal of our alignment is to create awareness around cases of possible wrong conviction, cases where often the story was told about them, but not by them. Here's a video to offer an overview of the genesis behind the program and a taste of what the 30 Discovery employees have been up to. Let's take a look.
Discovery is a purpose-driven company with a mission to educate, entertain, and when we're at our very best, to even inspire. We've always been committed to celebrating diversity, equity, and inclusion, and standing firm against all forms of discrimination. But with the tragic death of George Floyd, we knew we had to do more. We created a global PSA and special programming about racial justice, but we also wanted to create an opportunity for our employees to have direct impact and be part of the push for accountability. His death reminded all of us that the criminal justice system in the United States is flawed. And so we decided to focus on those whom that flawed system may have failed. Under the auspices of our corporate initiative, RISE, Reducing Inequality and Supporting Empowerment, we reached out to the founders of Georgetown University's Making an Exoneree program, Mark Howard and Marty Tancliffe, to develop a customized program for Discovery's employees. Mark and Marty are among the country's leading voices and advocates for criminal justice and prison reform. The program we created with them brings together employees from our offices around the world to assist in reinvestigating cases of potential wrongful conviction. Our employees review documents, they track down witnesses, they look for discrepancies in testimony, and they look into the context of what was going on in the given jurisdiction at the time of conviction, with the goal of encouraging pro bono counsel to take up the client's case, or if counsel is already on board, to assist them with investigatory work. Here's a look at their experiences thus far.
The harsh reality is the public believes when an individual is arrested for a crime that the right decision was made. Being accused of a crime that you didn't commit, especially murder, it's got to be one of the worst violations on the human soul. People do not want to question the authorities. And this is why it takes 10, 20, 30 years sometimes to undo a wrongful conviction.
What we're talking about are human beings that are suffering and they don't belong where they are.
We're up against something, a mountain of injustice that is very, very hard to overcome.
Discovery wanted to give its employees an opportunity to get out there and help with some social justice, something that we could go out there and really change people's lives.
We've had several mass exonerations. I think the media has been hugely helpful there.
It's one of the things that we instill in our students and you guys is that you become the voice for the voiceless. You're identifying all of these issues and your gut's saying something's wrong.
We're really playing like investigator, scribe, researcher, and lawyer.
We are pretty still early on in the process, but I think we're all extremely fired up and extremely invested.
We see so many people who are innocent in jail because they lack proper representation.
There are a list of suspects that were interviewed and implicated by a variety of people. And we don't really have an understanding of why that just got dropped. And then 4 years later, just based upon that partial fingerprint, someone who no one even knew or recognized suddenly gets picked up out of his life and thrown into this situation.
His attorneys were like, their case is so bad that we don't even need to prove just because there's such a lack of evidence.
To tell a jury that fingerprint analysis is 100% exact science is likely what put it over.
I'll be honest about the trial. I thought it went down rather fast and hastily. I've never heard of a murder trial being that short of a length as far as 2 days.
To base your case solely on this partial print, I feel is definitely a miscarriage of justice because that doesn't make any sense. One of the worst feelings in the world is when you leave.
Yes.
Because we can't take him with us.
You guys really have given not just me, him, and the family a whole rejuvenated energy to keep fighting, to keep persevering through all of this stuff. Because it's not a person that you're going against, it's a system. I just want him to get out so I can have some time to enjoy him and my mother together. That's what I pray for every night.
My greatest, highest use in society is trying to get wrongfully convicted people out of jail. It's hard and it takes a long time. But if you achieve it, you have a reward for life that you save somebody's life.
So we're excited to have with us two of the Discovery employees working on Discovery's Make an Exonerate program, as well as two of the family members of the man's case they are working on. Please welcome Lisa Clark, VP of Media Strategy and Analytics, and Alexandria Williams, Programming Solutions Analyst. Lisa and Alexandria are two of the 30 Discovery employees who are volunteering to reinvestigate potential wrongful conviction cases. Since earlier this year, they have been looking into the case of Mr. Brian Parnell, a Philadelphia area man charged with second-degree murder almost 20 years ago. And also, we're fortunate to have with us today Mr. Neil Parnell, Brian's father, and Ms. Tamara Parnell, one of Brian's sisters. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Brian has spent nearly 20 years in prison with a life sentence for a crime he always said he did not commit. Neil, can we please start with you and tell us a little bit about Brian?
Of course, Brian is my youngest son, and he's always been throughout his life, been honest to me. And if he had done something wrong, sooner or later, he would tell me that he did something wrong and confess to me anything that's wrong or right. He's a very smart individual. I think you've probably known that by now. He's always been a good student of anything that has to be learned for benefit of himself or help of others, because he's always been taught to help everyone he can help. He does that. He's always done that throughout his life.
I'm going to turn over to one of Brian's sisters. Tamara, can you talk to us about how Brian's conviction has changed the dynamics of your family at all?
We are suffering alongside with Brian, as although he's doing time in prison, we're doing time outside of prison because Brian has missed a lot of things like funerals, weddings, births of children, marriages. And it's difficult when someone has been falsely accused of something and they know they didn't do it and you know they didn't do it. So what happens is you feel disconnected, even though we can go to a prison and see him and he calls us at times. Those things are monitored and we only get like 15 minutes of a call. It feels as if we're incarcerated with him, that we're, like I said, we're doing the time along with him. When I think about Bryant being incarcerated, it's like a nightmare. And you want to wake up and you can't wake up because it's a reality. When you realize it, you're like, wow, did this really, really happen? So it has put a lot of strain. We're doing the best that we can because we stay together as a family and communicate. Prayer, walking, reading, we do whatever we need to do to try to get through it. And through all of this, the ironic thing is Brian is the most inspirational, motivated person through all of this. You would think that he would be harsh or bitter. No, we may carry those feelings, but he does not. He has empathy, sympathy, love, compassion. And that blows my mind away because I don't know if I would have the fortitude to be sustainable in a situation such as this. He is the light, and I'm grateful to call him brother.
Thank you for sharing. I think we all felt the love and just the amount of pressure and challenge your family have all had to withstand over the last 2 decades. And hearing of his resilience and his sense of inspiration just speaks to his spirit, and more importantly, just further connects all of us to you and Brian and the family. And it's critical that we have the conversations and we shine a light on cases like Brian's, and more importantly, hopefully create for truth and then in freedom. Alexandria, you have been working on Brian's case now for 6 months. What have you and the team members been doing to examine his case?
Yes, so I've been hard at work working on Brian's case for almost 6 months now, and it's just been amazing to work with such a dedicated and driven discovery team that we've really made it our mission to help Brian. We first had to look into the case and make sure that we became experts ourselves. We went through case documents, looked at reviewing evidence. We dug into all the players that were in this case and really had to make sure that we had a great understanding of what happened and really become experts ourselves. We also reached out to experts. With them, we also wanted to get their point of views, their insights, and really just get a greater grasp of what happened in Brian's case. And in order to help him the best we can, we wanted to get their point of view and really their insight of how we can move forward to best help Brian. We've also been working with Brian as well as his family. Some of us have even traveled out to Philadelphia to meet the family and interview them. So as time went on and we gathered more information on Brian's case and also spoke to our experts, we were able to start creating our own documents. So anything from character maps to timelines, we've really been able to use that to really move this forward in our case to help Brian.
Thanks for that, Alexandria. And Lisa, what are your thoughts and what are the issues you're seeing around Brian's case as you dig deeper?
We've seen many issues, but I'll try to focus on the ones that sort of stick out at the top. First, fingerprints. The partial latent prints that were lifted from the crime scene yielded no match to Brian's prints. Somehow, 4 years later, Brian's prints end up as one of the possible matches to those same prints, which makes absolutely no sense. The lead detective who testified at trial, he admitted that they didn't even bother to check the other possible matches. None of Brian's DNA matched any of the physical evidence at the scene, so none of it makes sense. Let's talk about legal representation. I think this was more heart-wrenching for the team. Brian's family specifically hired private counsel to avoid the possibility that his case would land in the hands of a legal aid attorney that might not be able to give his case proper attention. And in the end, Brian's defense team didn't really present a defense at all. said, Shireen, it was a 2-day trial from jury selection to conviction, which is virtually unheard of. The jury didn't get to hear that fingerprint analysis isn't 100% infallible. They didn't get to hear that Brian was on crutches from an ankle injury at the time of the murder.
Oh my gosh.
Those are just the top ones. I could go on, but those are the ones that sort of had us gobsmacked.
Wow. Tamara, what does it mean, or what did it feel like when you learned that this group of Discovery employees were going to be coming together to fight for justice for Brian?
To have a group of people that will listen, believe, and fight is amazing. This means everything to us to have this done and this group of people at the Discovery fight along with us, because they're like holding our hands and leading us through this meant the world to us. And we appreciate their tireless work and effort that they're giving for this case. We're at all of it.
Well, I can candidly say, as a member of the Discovery team, the conversation around making an exonerate and rise, our internal group that has really been committed to social impact and supporting a multitude of people, things, and causes that matter and are often marginalized or invisible or unheard. This has been a top priority, and your brother has been a top priority, and the commitment and dedication is real. And I believe everyone is really very much sincerely vested. And, God willing, truth will prevail and freedom will follow. Mr. Parnell, I just would love to ask you, what keeps you and your family going? And also, what do you think keeps Brian going?
To be honest, Brian keeps me going because I get depressed every now and then, just like anything. I'm human and I have emotional downswings and upswings, but he keeps me pretty well centered because he's so positive right now. From day one, he's always been positive because he says, I didn't commit this crime that they're charging me with. So why should I be all upset about something I didn't really do? Because I've always told him that sooner or later, every truth will come to light, every truth.
Lisa, I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think it's important that a company like Discovery get involved in a project like this? And what can viewers do? And all of those who are watching right now, what can we all do to support this critical and very important case and conversation and help to drive awareness?
Well, I think the program is so important because it could happen to any one of us. And the fact that it happens to Black people at an alarming rate means that more people need to understand that and get involved and do whatever they can. Discovery is giving me and my colleagues an opportunity to make a contribution that you can't put a price tag on. I would say that for anybody who's interested in supporting Brian's fight, helping us to help him fight his case from the street, they should go to justiceforbrianparnell.com. There's a lot more detailed information there about his case, and they can see how they can take action.
This has been a very eye-opening, emotional, and moving conversation. I can't thank you enough. Before we conclude today, are there any final takeaways or any final messages you would want the folks listening to hear?
I would just like to add my sincere thanks to the team at Discovery, because I've talked to several of your members and they seem to be very sincere. And I'm just thankful for someone to finally listen to us as a family, to what we're going through and the conditions that we've been put through by an unjust situation. I just say a heartfelt thank you to all of you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It means the world to us. Please listen to his story. Take it in. Try to digest it. And just imagine this could be you or someone you love or know.
Thank you all for participating. It has been emotional. It's been an inspiring panel. I think you've helped us all realize that this could be any of us, and all the more reason why we should treat and respond and be of service to Brian as though he is one of our own, because he is. And more importantly, a fight for Brian is a fight for all of our collective justice. And so thank you, and let's fight on. And thanks to everyone for joining us today for this powerful session. And thank you to Discovery for hosting these important and timely conversations. As was mentioned in our last discussion, we encourage everyone to check out justiceforbrianparnell.com. to learn more about one example of a man whose life and whose family's lives have been forever changed by our criminal justice system. Thank you again for being here with us virtually today.